Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope all are well. Thank you for joining us for today's Finance and Appropriations Committee. Mr. Treasurer, can we call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Cole?
Present.
Mr. Green?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Jordan? Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Ragland? You have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. All right. So we have a fairly robust agenda for today where we'll get a lot of information and a lot to chomp the bit on. Post our passing of the minutes, we'll go into our monthly financial report. We'll then go into our academic services, learning management system requests, and then we'll go over to academic services, English language arts, and mathematics textbook adoption. We'll then go into the self-sustaining funds update, where we'll talk through everything from food service to a short presentation on WCBE, and then we'll close for adjournment. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
I'll move it.
So moved. Second.
All right. Motion is second. Mr.
Okay. I'd just like to note that Mr. Jordan has joined the meeting. Mr. Cole?
Present.
Mr. Green?
You're on mute.
Yes, I'll move. Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
And Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
And Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Good to have those who just got on board with us. All right, Mr. Treasurer, if we can go through our monthly financial report.
All right. Thank you. This is the monthly financial report ending in April 30. Year-to-date summary, revenues are down about 18 million or 2%, and expenditures almost a like amount are under by 17 million, another 2%. That results in a cash balance of being pretty much on target at 377 million at the end of the month. Highlights for April revenues, really two areas. First being state funding. It continues to run under plan on a year-to-date basis, about $14 million. We expect that to resolve itself a bit to about 11.8 million due to the handling of student wellness and success funds. I looked at what it'll look like by the end of the year. So the plan for May and June calls for about 57 million total to be received. And if April continues, if May and June are like April in terms of actual receipts, it should be around 59 million or about 2 million over plan. So if we're 14 million under now, run 2 million over, then we should be 12 million under. So that's exactly what I was anticipating when it comes to how we accounted for the student wellness and success funds and what we had assumed in the plan, but then later learned would be recorded in a separate fund. A little update, recently, I'm sure you've heard that the state issued budget cuts. I believe it was 355 million for K-12 education. Of that, Columbus City Schools will see a 9.1 million reduction beginning the second payment in May, and it'll be spread over 3 payments, one in May and 2 in June. So we should end up about 21 million under plan for the state funding line, but keep in mind that almost 12 million of that is due to the treatment of the student wellness and success funds. I'd also like to remind you that for those of you, you did hear my 5-year forecast, that 9 million reduction in state funding is equivalent to about a 1% overall revenue variance. So I remember I did that to put things in perspective so that you knew that a 1% was a very small percentage change, really amounts to 9 million and some change. So this budget cut overall for the year, about 1% of our revenue, or likewise almost 1% of our expenditures too. So far, our comments have been that we're going to manage our way through it. We do have a cash balance. We have a practice of being conservative in our forecasting and budgeting. And, we plan to a 30-day cash balance. So all in all, while we don't relish any reduction in revenues, this hasn't triggered any knee-jerk reaction from us as of yet. A lot more on the horizon we don't know about, and the combination of some other negative factors, what will happen in FY21 with state revenue? Will it be a one-year issue, or will it be a multi-year issue? All big questions that have yet to be answered. And then we've had some property tax issues. Not only that was there a delay, which could be a short-term cash flow issue, but more importantly, we don't know what that second half collection of this calendar year will be like, which is in the first part of fiscal year 21. Will the unpaid taxes or delinquent taxes rise significantly and cause a shortfall in 21? We won't get that settlement information now until probably at the earliest late September, maybe even into October, with that 45-day delay in property tax payment deadlines. So, there's still a lot of uncertainties, and before we know for sure, some of those deadlines have been pushed out. I heard the other day that the state may not be making a statement about FY21 until maybe September or October, once they see more about how the state budget is going. So we may be entering next school year with still two major uncertainties on the revenue side. That's it for state funding. On the property tax allocation, this is simply a timing issue. We planned for it in April. It actually came in May. So it's 15.8 million under for the month, or 14.4 million for the year. But I do know that it has been received and posted. As I said, we're expecting 15.8 in the plan. We actually received 16.8 for the general fund. So we should end the year about 2.5 million above plan. So that's good news. Graphically, you can see property taxes, they are under plan, but very close. Again, state revenue running under plan. All other revenues, very close, but you can see when we break all of the revenues down that there's a large variance in property tax allocation. That's a homestead and rollback payment that the state reimburses us for. Once that comes in, that will be relatively neutral in terms of variance. But again, all the revenues, no real activity this month in that category, believe it or not. So it stands pretty much unchanged in its variance from last month. But that's the big contributor to a variance in the other revenue categories. Just graphically, the picture of that, and then my high and low designation. The only changes here in property tax allocation that went unfavorable, that is under plan, and it is high in terms of variance amount. But again, that will resolve itself this next month. On the expenditure side, personnel expenditures overall ran about 662,000 over plan for the month. 428,000 of that was in salaries and wages, and 234,000 in benefits. So year to date, salaries and wages are now, for the first time, over plan by about $285,000, or 0.1%. Benefits have reduced their under plan number to 1.8 million. But keep in mind that we will be making an adjustment or a recoding of salary and benefit expenditures over to the student wellness and success fund of about $11.8 million. And it's almost coincidental, but typically we can be in that 1 to 2% variance range on this line item, which would amount to about $12 million. So assuming that this all goes, had we not done the student and wellness recoding, we would have been very, very close to on plan in our final expenditures compared to plan by the end of this fiscal year. probably closer than we've been before. And this recoding just kind of recreates what we would typically expect in a variance. So again, I think personnel will end up about 12 million under plan after we get that that posting done, maybe even a little bit less, and still, on target. In our forecast, we are assuming that those salary and benefit expenditures remain over in the Student Wellness and Success Fund for the duration. And I don't know, again, another unknown, what happens in the state budget next year when they look to fiscal 22 and 23. Will they continue to fund the Student Wellness and Success Fund initiatives the same way they have in the past? We just don't know, but that could cause those expenditures and hopefully that revenue to come back into the general fund, making it cash balance neutral. But again, a large unknown that we have no way to predict. Purchase services continued over plan this month. Actually, it was the first time that we were over plan for the fiscal year. I delved into that, and it has to do with a single payment. We made a single payment to I Know I Can, and that drove, I believe that was around, I want to say $1.3 million, but that drove this line item over plan for the month. Typically, I Know I Can have been paid in 2 or 3 installments, and for whatever reason, it was paid in just 1 installment this year. So that was really just a timing issue. Now we're about 8.6 million under plan year to date, and I'm very confident we'll end the year under plan on purchase services. Charter deductions remain to run under plan, and that may increase. There is not yet a decision at the state level about whether or not charter schools will be subject to a reduction in state aid, similar to what other K-12 institutions have been. I've heard some rumors about some numbers, so I don't want to guess too soon. But whatever it is, that will be a reduction in our expenditures, which will kind of offset that $9.1 million revenue loss. So all in all, if they do something with charter schools, this means that net reduction to us will be something less than $9 million, something less than 1% overall variance number, if you will, to our budget. So again, we really don't appreciate having reductions made, but I think at least for FY20, we can manage through that. My comparison with taking personnel and charter, which comprise 90% of our total year-to-date expenditures, we're within 5 million, obviously under plan, or 0.8% variance on over $657 million expended year-to-date. So I think we're pretty close on our projections. Graphically, admittedly kind of boring, but you'll see that we're right on target. In the other expenditures, personnel is the one that stands out. I'm sorry, purchase services is the one that stands out. And again, on variances, you'll see purchase services here. And then capital outlay is a large percentage, but a very small dollar amount. All but debt are favorable, as in under plan, and debt is over plan by an overwhelming $17,000. So we were very, I think that's a rounding error. Most of these are all one are low in terms of dollar amount, and you can see it's kind of split low to high in terms of percentages. So again, on the expenditure side, we're pretty much right on target. So to conclude, revenues are down this month, but the bulk of it will resolve itself in May. And expenditures continue their pattern of being under plan, and this month, year to date, we stand at 2% under plan. That's the report for April, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. I will stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone, and if you need to go back to a slide, I can easily do that.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions at this point?
I have a question. Tell me, how does this affect the CARES Act money that is getting allocated? How is that working into the system from ODE?
I think I'm looking here at who's in the, yes, Dr. Roush is here and Scott Gooding are here, and they've been, the lead on those conversations. So I'll give you my nugget of what I know. Those dollars are going to be accounted for separately. So they won't appear, in this general fund statement. They won't appear in the 5-year forecast. The dollar amount, I believe, is a net of close to 27 million. See if I get a nod of the head. The non-public money is added on top of that. That'll be distributed through us as well. And Scott and Eric can speak to some of the restrictions that will be on those funds and how we plan to handle it in terms of its impact on our other operating expenses.
That was good seeing. I'm actually pulling up the document here right now. Yeah, Mr. Jordan, that's a great question. We are looking. I'm trying to get the number here. What we think we're getting. Yeah, just over 27 million. So there are 12 uses that are allowable as part of this relief. It's effective back until March 13th when the state of emergency was called. ODE, I believe, is planning on releasing the application next week. So we are working with the senior leadership, and actually tomorrow, as part of our cabinet meeting, we're going to be talking about that. We've received information from other large districts to see what they're doing, to see what we can do to kind of go back and recode some current expenses that we've incurred as a result of the school closures. Obviously, in lieu of the current year $9.1 million budget reduction that we had. So we want to make sure we can preserve some cash balance with that. Obviously, everything's on the table. Decisions have not been made at this point, but those are just things that we're going through. We're looking at things that, for example, there's social emotional piece. It's very, very loose, very, I think as ODE referred to it, maximum flexibility, things that were allowable under the grants. There's a lot of waivers and carryover provisions within that don't apply with these funds. They carry over through September of 22. We're looking at technology devices. Those are big ones. So one of the things that we've dealt with is through Chromebook distribution, trying to get devices to our families and students as best we can. $27 million is a lot. That's going to be that's a good problem to have to address some of these needs that have been highlighted as part of this closure. So we're going to work through that tomorrow, get something planned and submitted to ODE next week. And we're trying to figure out the timing of that, because I think it makes it bad when you're closing a fiscal year in June and you can get access to it. You understand, the middle part or end of June as you're trying to close out a fiscal year makes it pretty difficult from an accounting standpoint. But those are things we can deal with, and we can make those adjustments. So we're working through that. So we've got the plans to use those funds efficiently.
Do they have supplement rules, not supplement rules, or suspend those two? So that is really helpful to go back and take advantage of that. Then that's really nice.
Yes, and another piece that's out there. It's just a proposal at this point. It's called, Dr. Roush will correct me if I say this wrong, it's the HEROES Act that's been proposed, that there's a lot in there for technology, broadband access, some other things. So it's just a proposal that we're monitoring, but that's an additional pot of money. If that goes through, that we'll have access to, and we'll jump all over that as well. And I got a comment from him that I said I got that correct. Thank you, Eric.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
And just so you know, Mr. Jordan, a little code word, when I say recoding, that's in lieu of the word supplant. So I picked that up from another colleague out there that said we're recoding expenditures that we've incurred that qualify for those dollars, for the use of those dollars, whatever it may be, the student wellness dollars or the CARES Act money. Those things that we're already doing. If we've already expended dollars in that effort, then we should be able to use those dollars for that. So we'll recode them against those funds.
Jeff's old ODE ears perked up when you said recoding. So I had to smile at that when you said that. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there, I'm sorry, are there any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can, is there an audit on those dollars to make sure that they're used in a certain way so you don't have to give them back, or not?
On the CARES Act dollars or
Yeah.
student wellness dollars?
Yeah, the dollars that you're just referencing, I guess.
I don't know that in any of the legislation there is any comment about an audit, but rest assured, there will be an audit of some sort. I was on a conference call with the Auditor of State's office, and I remember a sentence, something to the effect of, be sure you use those dollars for their intended purpose. That applies to me. There you go. There's another code for I will be in to take a look after the fact. So I'm pretty sure that, yeah, they'll be checked for, the purpose and whether or not they qualify.
I'll just add my little 2 cents to that, in saying that outside of this money, I know that we've made practice in the past of really being stringent about taking full account of how we're spending our federal dollars that have been appropriated to us. That's been a big conversation in audit and accountability committee over the years that I've been privy to. So I know that this is some area where we've really sought to be very responsible and try to make gains.
If I may add, my understanding is yes, there will be some oversight of those federal dollars, particularly in the CARES Act. I know that there's something out from their Office of the Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Education, kind of giving a brief overview of things they're going to be kind of looking for. They're geared more at the state level, since that's where the funds flow to predominantly, but there are some pieces that do apply locally as well.
Thank you, Dr. Roush. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. If all minds are clear, we can move on to fiscal year 20 budget requests.
All right, thank you, Stan. I'll just real briefly, I'll just kick this off and then turn these over to Dr. Ocasio. There are 2 requests before the committee today, both handled in a little different fashion. The first one is a little bit after the fact. The board has already approved this as part of last month's amended appropriations resolution, and it was due to the emergency nature of getting this done through the school closure, so that we could get the learning management system purchase order initiated and get this order placed. So if Dr. Ocasio will talk about this one, and the next one is for a future resolution that we have on the board agenda for a textbook adoption next Tuesday. So Stan, if you'll go back to the first one, then I'll turn that over to Dr. Ocasio to answer any questions that you may have.
So this very first one is for the learning management system that we purchased and had approved at the board meeting last, I guess it was last month, actually. If there are any questions on this one may have already been answered with those questions.
Dr. Ocasio, the only thing I would note for those that are looking at this is not an increase in this is just a reallocation of dollars. It actually came out of my OPU, where we posted that Franklin County tax refund. And so that freed up the appropriation there, and we moved it from my OPU over to the teaching and learning OPU. Correct, Scott?
You said that was correct.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yep, correct.
All right, Dr. Ocasio.
So the next one is actually to reallocate money, given well, let me start with, the district has not done a curriculum adoption in about 15 years. And typical school districts will do a 5-year cycle of different subject areas, and we have revised that 5-year cycle. We began with the most critical, which is ELA and math. It does say textbooks. So one of the things that we did as a team is we were very frugal in our spending, and we're very intentional about our spending. So we took the leftover of our spending and would like to do a line item transfer to reallocate that money to cover the curriculum adoption for ELA reading, or ELA, which is English Language Arts, at the elementary level. And so while it says textbooks, and that's the fund that it goes into, this adoption allows us access to virtual materials, knowing that we may be doing virtual learning next year. And it also gives us other information that teachers would be able to supplement that virtual learning. It would also give continuity of the learning experience, because if we were, let's say, in school for a certain number of days and then out of school a certain number of days, there'd be continuity because it would be the same instructional materials. If we end up opening in a model where kids come 2 days a week in a cohort fashion and are home 3 days, it would allow for that very seamlessly. It would also allow us to do all virtual if necessary. If there's a situation such as there was this March where kids were out 5 days a week, we would be able to do that with the district adopted curriculum materials, and teachers could also use them in a blended fashion as well. So let's say we were in traditional setting, teachers could use both the virtual materials as well as which is the online platform associated to this curriculum, as well as the traditional materials that you would see in a classroom. And so we are asking to take the money that we did not spend in other categories. When I first came last August, the district had not set aside money for an adoption, but working with our team and then being edified in that curriculum audit, we definitely needed to adopt materials both in ELA and math, as well as then produce a regular curriculum cycle.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ocasio. So just in summary here, with these transfers, first of all, we standardized curriculum in the district. And essentially now we're using some of these dollars that have been left over to expand our capacity and build our capacity in virtual learning, and particularly a targeted area of English language arts for our elementary school students. So we're looking at the overall outcome being increasing literacy, reading and writing for our youngsters in this grade band.
Yes, that's correct. So we are focusing first on this particular one, and you will see more similarly to this, where we will be asking to fund the rest of English language arts, which would be the secondary level, the 6 to 12, with the same criteria. Each of the programs that we're adopting, we're making sure that there is a virtual component, so that if we are in school full-time, we have that opportunity for technology integration. If we are here part-time, where we're on these cohort groups, we are also able to use seamless integration of technology to do that with traditional and non-traditional. And then also, if we have to be completely virtual next year, this would allow us to have the right materials in conjunction to using that learning management system that we saw in the prior item. And we were very intentional about the spending in order to cover this. You'll see more though for math, K to 12, and then you'll also see the rest of English language arts at some point.
Beautiful. Are there any other questions from the committee?
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say that that's really great planning. So it's great to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. I do want to ask very quickly before we transition to the additional budget, the sustaining funds conversation. Where does special needs fall within this funding? Are we looking at these dollars supporting that cohort of students as well?
Yes, so both ELA are both ESL, which is our English language learners, as well as the students with IEPs. We have considered how these resources would work with them as well, and you'll hear more about our multi-tiered system of support. We've identified how that fits into that multi-tiered system of support. We also have adopted some other platforms that you've already seen on the board agenda, things like Unique Systems that allows for our multi-disabilities classrooms, which might not be as appropriate to use the grade level materials based on need. As well as to be able to serve our students with related services. So we've really taken an intentional approach. One of the things that will not come before you because it's a smaller expense, but you'll see it at some point on board agendas, are things like our program for supporting gifted students and providing enrichment. We've adopted something that can be used virtually throughout the district. And so we've been really intentional about making sure that the things that we have in front of students are not only appropriately rigorous, but then also will meet the needs regardless of the flexible nimbleness that's going to be required of us as we move forward next year.
I thank you so much for that. There aren't any additional questions or comments. we can move on to fiscal year 20 self-sustaining funds update.
So I think I'm first, the food service fund. So thank you, Board Member Cole. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that now. So some of this you've seen before when we were there just a couple short months ago presenting on our self-sustaining funds. I'm here to talk about the Food Service Fund 006. And again, just for review purposes, food service funds are mandated to be a standalone fund and an enterprise fund. So program highlights, same as before, we subscribe to the community eligibility provision. We provide all of our students in Columbus City Schools a free breakfast and a free lunch. And the past 5 years, we've been able to positively contribute to our fund balance. Participation, as I've talked about before, is our largest driver of profitability. And we benchmark that not only in the state, but also through the Council of Great City Schools KPI system as well. So now to the meat of why we're here today, the impact of COVID-19 to our food service fund. As you may or may not be aware, we continue to provide meals at 15 distribution sites around the city, averaging about 6,000 meals a day. That is, during the school year, we're closer to 60,000 meals a day. So that's about 10% of what we typically do. Some things that have helped us is the USDA has provided a non-congregated feeding waiver. And in layman's terms, that means children don't need to be there to eat during that meal. The way it normally works, a student needs to be there at breakfast to get breakfast or at lunch to get lunch. The way this works is they don't have to be there for that meal. So typically when we hand out meals, we hand out that meal and the next meal. So if someone decides the time of breakfast works better for their family, they can pick up breakfast and lunch. If they show up at lunch, they can pick up the next morning's breakfast as well, which is the way we distribute most of our meals. That waiver, though, is set to run out June 30th, 2020, although there is the ability for the Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture to extend it through September 30th of 2020. It's widely anticipated that that waiver will be extended through the end of summer, so schools aren't forced to transition what they're doing through summer, but until they actually do that, nothing is guaranteed. The other thing I have in there is, uncertainty with waivers, as well as the way we're going to provide service, will affect us not only through the end of this fiscal year, but also well into next school year. There are a number of different school models being talked about, and as we as a district decide what we're going to do, if social distancing is a rule, it's going to limit the number of kids who can be in the cafeteria, potentially the number of kids who are in a school on a given day. So if there's only half the kids in a school on a given day, then that's only half of our customer base, although our expenses typically don't cut in half when we do that. It's our hope, and we keep advocating with the USDA through our state as well as through national groups to continue non-congregate feeding through the next school year as well. Because if we are in a model where we don't have students there every day, it would be nice to be able to send meals home with them before they leave. So that way we can continue to feed our students even on days when they're not in school, and they could take that stuff with them. Specifically about the food service fund for this school year, beginning cash balance at the beginning of the year was $12,368,000, as you see. One thing of note, fiscal year 19 receivables. So, we get our funding based on when we serve meals during the school year. That funding is delayed on when we receive it from the state. So fiscal year 19 meals we served, school year 18-19 meals we served, we didn't receive $6 million plus in that reimbursement until fiscal year 20. So for that reason, when you look at our profitability for fiscal year 20 on a cash basis, it'll come across as that we're trending right now to make $830,000 in profit for this school year. The reason of that is because we have that $5 million or $6 million in fiscal year 19 money that was earned in fiscal year 19 that only showed up in fiscal year 20. Really, the impact of the school closures to the food service fund is just over $5.2 million. But based on what we had happen before, our projected ending cash balance is 13.2 million. So we are still in a good shape moving through this year. Obviously, what happens next year with how we feed students, as well as with waivers with the USDA, will have a huge impact on how we continue to maintain profitability in the future. This is just a breakdown of where our costs go between salaries, benefits, supplies, and materials as well. And that is all I have. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm open to any questions, sir.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Mr. Brown. Are there any questions? And before we take them, I definitely want to say to Madam President Carson, thank you so much again for the work that you're doing with the administration and leadership of Joe Brown to ensure that our students and their families have meals every day when we were out of school and not even being able to be in attendance. So thank you so much for that.
Chairman Cole, I did want to comment on that. Joe did a great job with this, and we're extremely fortunate to have Joe and what they do with food service. Many districts statewide are funded through a generous donation from the general funds. We are quite profitable, almost actually too profitable if there is such a thing. But we'll take that. One of the things that we're looking at, as I mentioned, the HEROES Act. If that does go through, there is a potential there that is a piece that we would go for reimbursement to help offset those operating losses. So we're going to continue to monitor that very closely to see if there's some potential funding that we can get back to the food service program with that.
A lot of national organizations are pushing for somewhere between 50 and 60% of the revenue lost by food service funds over that time period through the HEROES Act to be able to offset the fixed expenses that we haven't been able to reduce.
A quick question on the impact of the waiver piece, specifically to our personnel. What is the projected impact, if at all, from a personnel standpoint? Are we looking at a possible look at reductions? I mean, what are the implications of the effects of COVID, this pandemic, on a social distancing factor that may happen in the future?
So it's still a little early to know that, as you know. The key here, as I said in my presentation, the key driver for us is participation. So if the USDA puts in place some type of non-congregate feeding where we can feed our students who are in school, as well as, say, students, hypothetical situation, but if students are there Monday and Tuesday and not there Wednesday and Thursday, and we could send meals home with them for those days and get reimbursement for those meals, well, then we're at a place where we are going to have work for our staff to do, as well as the revenue to stay whole. If the USDA wouldn't allow that, and we would only be able to feed students who are on site on a given day, then it'll be more challenging for us. Until we understand what our model is going to be as a school district, as well as what allotments the USDA will allow, it's extremely difficult to say what the final impact will be. But we know short term we're able to handle this. Long term, we'll have to look at everything, but that would be the absolute last thing we would want to do, because we know eventually we're going to need those people. You're muted, sir.
Likewise, I just wanted to make sure too that we ensure that there's that ongoing conversation with their leadership, so that we're working in collaboration to kind of figure this out, whether it's on an interim or a long term. And that's something that you or the superintendent can refer to right now.
Well, and while we are a standalone fund, we don't make any of those types of decisions in a vacuum. We would work, I report to the superintendent. We work with HR. Those decisions would be made. I would certainly have an opportunity to provide feedback, but those people would be deeply involved in making those decisions.
Board Member Cole. Hi, this is Lois. I would just like to publicly say Mr. Brown and his team wholeheartedly works in collaboration with us. Very rarely are there decisions made to impact the membership that he does not have conversation. We have worked together since the day we shut down, even on Sundays, calling one another and having dialogue about what the plan and the vision is going to be. So I can speak on behalf of all the food service staff. We appreciate the working relationship, and we never doubt what's coming out of food service because there's open communication all the time. So we thank you, Joe, and your team for what you're doing to make this happen. But more important, I thank you on behalf of the kids because I run my grandson over to the sites to get lunch. So helping our babies. It's not about us adults, it's about the babies. So on behalf of my membership, we thank you for the partnership.
Thank you for that, Madam President. Are there any other questions, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, just again, I want to add to what's been said. This program of feeding our kids has been incredibly important and has been, despite the situation we're in, one of the success stories about how we've handled it. And it's been seen and commented on by lots of people in the community. And I too want to thank and congratulate Joe, as well as all of Lois's members that work in our food service program. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments before we move on to Adult Ed Fund? Awesome. All right, moving right along. Ms. Wilkerson?
Yes.
You want to do Ms. Latchkey next? I think we had Adult Ed. We can do Latchkey here.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let me, I think we threw them off, Stan. I'm going to run the presentations for at least the next two, if that's okay.
So are we doing Adult Ed or Latchkey?
I think I've got you here.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, I did. We can be flexible. We got it.
Okay.
All right, I'll take your lead here, Rochelle.
All right, we can start with Latchkey. Again, thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss how this has impacted our Latchkey program. As you recall, when we presented last, our Latchkey is a self-sustaining program to provide before and after school high quality care for our K through 8 students. Obviously, with us not being in physical environment of school, our Latchkey program had to greatly change. One of the ways that we changed our focus is to utilize our Latchkey staff in the similar way that we're utilizing our teachers. So our Latchkey staff had been redirected to make connections with parents, to continue to determine if their support was needed, whether it was social emotional support, food insecurity, any type of resource support, or educational support. So our teachers have been working directly with families. They are continuing to provide that homeschool connection, supporting the teachers at times because they're working directly with their building principals as well as the classroom teachers of the students that attend Latchkey to support their instruction. They're continuing to work on their professional development as Latchkey is overseen by ODJFS, and we also follow the Step Up to Quality rating system. So this gives our Latchkey staff an opportunity to participate in the mandated professional development. They're also preparing any remaining end of the year paperwork for and financial information, because they do, since we are self-sustaining, they do that on site. They're also really focusing on the social emotional impact of our students as well. I have some anecdotal information from one of my Latchkey coordinators that they are having Zoom meetings with their Latchkey students and families just to talk about where they are in their academics, where they are in their home life, and how the Latchkey staff can support that. I don't know if you're familiar with Jib Jab, but one of the Latchkey staff shared it with us that they provided just a Jib Jab, which was a very kind and uplifting notice that we are here for you, and that even though we're not seeing you face to face, your Latchkey team at this, and it was the Winterset building, is still here to support you in any way possible. They're also looking at registration. As you know, Latchkey is a very high demand program that we have, and obviously our registration process is very succinct, because we have to make sure that we accept in the order where people register. It's typically always done on site. We don't do a lot of, sending documents home and bringing them back, because there's always the fear that someone may not be get access to a program. So we've restructured our registration program, and it's in its final stages of approval from leadership, that we will be doing registration for our currently registered families via an online system. And our Latchkey teachers at the building level will be communicating directly with families and accepting those registrations in order of parents respond to a specific email. We will start registering for non-current families, or families that have been put on a wait list, later in June. Also looking at how we return in the fall. As what's been stated previously, there's so many unknowns that we are unsure what that would look like, but we're already in the process of kind of looking at option A, option B, and option C on what Latchkey might look like to respond to what the district puts in place for our physical attendance. And we are very prepared that should ratios change on how many students can be in a certain space, every one of our buildings has a primary and a secondary space that we can utilize for Latchkey. And most of our programs have more than one adult. So we can really be flexible to ensure that once our families start going back to work in the fall, even if students are not coming on a regular basis, we will still be able to provide that before and after school care for families who need it. So as far as the projected cash balance, I'm going to turn the financial portion back over to Scott, unless there are any other questions about the impact that our COVID-19 pandemic has had on our Latchkey program.
Are there any questions at this point? I just have one quick one. One, and they can actually two, but they can be answered fairly quickly. One is, can you talk just a bit about the certifications, the qualifications of our Latchkey staff, so that folks understand who actually is working with our youngsters in these after school hour programs? And then the second question is, what is our Step Up to Quality rating with regards to our Latchkey piece?
Those are very good questions, and those are things that we're very proud of. Unlike other, I would say, neighborhood or other districts, all of our Latchkey staff members have at least a minimum of a bachelor's degree. All of them are licensed through ODE, either with a standard teacher's license or a substitute license. And our instructional assistants are also certified through ODE in the same way that our classroom-based instructional assistants are also certified. As far as the step up to quality, we have been very, very, and I don't want to say lucky because our staff works extremely hard to get those ratings, but of the Latchkey programs who have been rated, every program that's been rated through this year has been rated either a 4 or 5-star rating by Step Up to Quality.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to make sure, again, if we're talking about outcomes for youngsters, that the quality aspect of this is something that we take in serious consideration in what we provide our children so that they transition through school with some added supports, you know, during the after school hours, whether it's before school or after.
Yeah, thank you, Rochelle. With the project, we've got a projected ending cash balance, a deficit of 300,000 that we're looking at. It's a deficit, but we're glad that the board took action, not this school year, but last school year, to increase latchkey fees. That was the first time that we have increased fees in over 10 years. So I think without taking that appropriate step, the projected cash balance would obviously be a lot worse. One of the things that we talked about when we did that fee increase was to look at it on a much more frequent basis, looking at what the fees are in the market and see how we compare it to make sure that we're being competitive. So this is something that we're looking at. Obviously, now it's a projected number. We still have the remaining time in May as well as June. And then we'll have to make a decision with the board at year end if it's from an accounting transaction standpoint, if it's something that we want to transfer from the general fund or if it's just something that we advance in order to close out the fiscal year. So those will be things that we'll be discussing and having to take action on that in June.
Are there any additional questions for, yes, Mr. Brown?
Yeah. I'd like to just follow up briefly on your question. And I'm really pleased to hear that our Latchkey programs have received the stepping up 4s and 5s. But how many of our Latchkey programs have not yet been rated? Or what percentage have not yet been rated?
I don't have that number right in front of me. I want to say that about 85%, there's only a couple. I think everyone has been visited, but I don't believe that we have received the ratings from ODE for those few remaining programs.
Okay. All right. But that just help fill out the picture.
Okay. And all of our programs had to be registered
Right.
by October of last year, but they haven't quite visited every single program as of yet. However, some of our programs were rated and they're already in their annual review process. And everyone who has gone through their annual review has been able to maintain their 4 or 5-star rating.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, as we talk about accessibility, you all know that equity is a big issue amongst us all here. And we want to always think about considering accessibility of this type of program to youngsters that otherwise might not be able to have it. So as we have this question or this conversation and subsequent deliberation around raising fees, right? Where are we factoring in accessibility and the expansion of this program for other kids who may not be able to afford it?
We are always looking at expanding the program where it is requested. Our Latchkey program, our current standard policy is that if a school is interested in having a Latchkey program at their building, then we would have at least a minimum of 13 parents request interest. That number allows us to be financially secure in hiring the staff for that building. For a lot of our buildings, right now we have 22 Latchkey programs. Last year we had interest at Coleraine, but after further research, there was not enough parent interest. But whenever we have a building principal or a community request interest, we do a full promotion at that building to try to ensure that we elicit as much communication that this is something that the building is considering. And then based on parent response, that's where we would place another Latchkey program. In some situations, and it is unfortunate, Latchkey attendance has gone down and we've had to close a program and restructure the families to other local programs that were close. But that has only happened, I want to say twice in the existence of Latchkey. Typically, we are adding new programs, not taking them away.
Thank you for that. I do have some questions offline. I don't want to belabor, but I thank you so very much for that. Are there any additional questions or comments as we move on to adult ed? Dr. Roush, you made a comment.
Just letting folks know I was back. I had to step away for a moment.
Okay. BRB, be right back. Got you. All right. Okay. Man, these abbreviations. All right. Adult ed.
All right. So there we go. I'll welcome Ed O'Reilly to the Brady Bunch screen here that we've got as we work through that. So Ed, I've got you up and ready to go.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be back after our 4-month hiatus from the committee. So the Adult Education Fund 012 primarily runs our practical nursing program. And I just want to take a quick second. That's a 67-year-old program that's been very traditional in nature. I think we learned on March 11th that we're going to be closed on March 12th, right around those timeframes. And by March 16th, which was the start of a brand new term for us, we were up and online and delivering curriculum. So my nursing staff did a great job of turning around in 4 days and keeping things moving right along. So, but that's the primary program that we're talking about today, because that's what we find out at 012. I shared these highlights. Those highlights were shared before. Probably don't need to belabor those. I'll go right to what has occurred since the shutdown as far as losses. So, and I'll explain each of these as we go. These are actual to-date losses due to COVID-19. Students have to take tests and they have to be proctored, and the company who provides the test found a third-party proctoring service. They won't let us proctor them online, but they'll let the third party proctor those online. So our nursing students are currently taking tests online, and they're being proctored through this company. Ed2Go online courses. We're actually a third-party provider for online courses of Ed2Go. So if a company wanted their staff to be trained in something like Microsoft Office, they could contact us. We get them set up, and we can provide this online courses, and they're through Ed2Go. So we actually reached out to them and utilized some of their medical courses to jumpstart the term. So our students were engaged in Ed2Go online courses that mirror our curriculum right at the very beginning of the term. The third one is PPE donation and reorder. There was a call by the governor that if you had supplies to donate them to local health organizations. So we did have some PPE. It was sitting in a closet at the time. We thought it would be better used on the front line, so we did donate that. We are going to replace those. I have Lobby Guard on there because when we don't currently have Lobby Guard, and we need a systematic way to track people once we're open again. When somebody comes to visit, if somebody would come down sick, we want to have a record of address and contact information. So we're putting that in really due to the fact we need to track people in case there's sickness. Adult diploma is another program we run through adult education. We get reimbursed by the state for running that program. We have to totally shut that down at this time. You can't, that's a very difficult program to do online. So we lost some revenue there. And nurse aid tuition, students take STNA courses through us. And again, that was shut down. As part of the state budget cuts, the Ohio Department of Higher Ed cut our final payment, quarterly payment, by $12,700. And we lost $6,000 in Perkins. So to date, we're down $100,700. Those are actual. And then the next talks about, Scott, could you move to the next? So there's a potential loss due to COVID. We have a new term beginning August 14th. And most of the money we get for this program is really generated by student tuition. Right now, we only have one student enrolled. We usually have 30 to 40. Really difficult to recruit online when they can't come in and talk to you and see the program and talk to you face to face and see, our face-to-face instruction model. And I would tell you, most of our students are generally pretty late in enrolling. We have enrollments all the way through July. So the hope is, of course, we'll have more students. But if no more students enroll, we would stand to lose over $600,000. Again, we traditionally have late enrollees. We've never had problems meeting our enrollment expectations, but it's not a guarantee at this stage. It's just a different world for students that they're navigating, and they're going through all their family and work life issues as well. And some students are probably backing off of furthering their education at this time because they're dealing with so many other things. So that's just a potential loss. And then we are recipients of CARE Act dollars. So Scott, if you could. Okay, that's the next. All right, so we do have about $500,000 still projected ending cash balance. So we are in good fiscal shape. Of course, that could disappear quickly if we don't enroll more students. But with the CARE Act, we're eligible for $500,000. $142,000 has to go directly to students in the form of grants. So we are in that process right now. Students are applying for grants, and that money will be dispersed hopefully in the coming weeks. Those are for students in need. And they'll essentially, the government's given us money to pass through on to students, and we're administering that through the Office of Adult Education. There'll be an initial $358,000 to cover programmatic losses and changes. Scott, is there another slide with that? Oh, okay. I had broken that down a little bit. So that $358,000 can cover the $100,000 we spent already, so we can reimburse the program for that loss. We can also reimburse the program for lost tuition if that indeed occurs this coming fall. So we're partially covered by the CARES Act, but if we have a very low enrollment for the August term, it won't quite cover the loss there. Other than that, the students are doing great, and teachers are doing fine, and things are moving along in adult education. And we're a year-round program, so things will not slow down for us on June 1.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Mr. O'Reilly. Are there any questions at this point in time? Can you talk about success rate for adult ed?
For the nursing program?
Yes.
Yeah.
For any given section, yes.
We are always, so there's a national test that all nursing students have to take. It's called NCLEX. And we are traditionally about 94% passage rate, which is traditionally 7 to 8 points above the state average. So we do really well as far as student success with our program. And we just did, some students had just graduated prior to COVID, and the state testing was cut, but the state allowed them to get jobs right away. So a number of our students are already, I said graduates, are already working in the health industry.
Thank you so much for that. If we're ready, we can move on to the next portion. Thank you again, Mr. O'Reilly.
Certainly.
And I've unshared my screen, so Scott Varner is last but not least with WCBE.
Well, thank you, committee, for an opportunity to talk to you again about WCBE. Let me begin to share my screen so that I can walk you through our presentation. So today, as part of giving an update on our finances to the group, I thought it was important to not only give you a snapshot of our current financial situation with the radio station, but because of the interest in the future of the radio station, I thought to touch briefly upon our future financial planning, much of it being geared and shaped by the lessons that we learned over the past year as part of the stabilization and reimagination effort that we launched really about a year ago after some challenges at the radio station. So I'll briefly touch upon that as we look to the next steps that we're taking. Very quickly though, allow me to give you the quick history recap, and hopefully this will spark your memory of the last time that I shared with this committee. As you all know, WCBE was launched in 1956 out of the basement of the main building downtown. It was the original distance learning, airing 5 hours of programming, classroom work throughout the day during the school year. That grew to eventually have classical music added to it by the 1970s. It was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week station, and was a charter member, an original member of National Public Radio. We quickly advanced to the 2000s, and a turning point at the station in 2001 when the Board of Education determined that there would no longer be direct general fund support of the station. I always include this quote from the chair of this committee at the time, who raised concerns that the radio station didn't directly support improving the academic achievement of students. It was at this time that, in response to this cut from the board, that the station being popular, having a strong following, they were able to raise the dollars to cover that gap and become quote unquote self-sustaining. And I'll explain that asterisk in a minute. So what did self-sustaining mean? Well, that meant that now their major revenue sources would be advertising or underwriting. That's in the world of public radio, it's underwriting. It would be membership, those monthly and annual donations, typically as people sign up during the spring and fall fund drives that the station has. There are always direct donations that the station gets. And then there are grants, both at the federal and state level. Now, the district still did give indirect support, managing such things as, facilities, safety, HR, accounting, those types of services. And of course, the station received assistance from volunteers and interns. As I said, the station was self-sufficient until last year, last fiscal year, when, as many of you know, after uncovering that some bills to National Public Radio had gone unpaid for a number of years, that the district did have to make an investment of $870,000 from the general fund to help pay for those expenses. That all said, that's when we launched the stabilization reimagination effort, and as part of that, and what I shared with this committee at the time is that we estimated that the general operating expenses, as we got a better handle on how much it actually costs to run the station, would be between $1.5 million to $1.6 million. We also estimated, based upon the prior year's revenue, again, mostly done through underwriting and membership, that the revenue to the station would be approximately $800,000 to $900,000. That was a gap of about between 700 and 800,000. And in working with the treasurer's office and the budget office, 750,000 was set aside, recognizing that would likely be the gap that we would have to cover. Again, much of that I shared with you the last time we came together. So now let me give you a picture of where we currently stand with the station. Now that we've had a full year to better understand the costs of operating the station, we know that the operating expenses for this fiscal year will come in right about, again, 1.6 million, a little bit over. You see the top 6 expenses at the station. The number one continuing to be our personnel costs, our salary and benefits. That number was a little higher based upon some overtime, one-time payments of some overtime that had been allowed to accumulate. You also see our second largest expense is programming. And because I know you'll ask the question, how much of that is National Public Radio, you see that about half or more than half is for National Public Radio. Those are our expenses as they've come in for the year. Now we look at the revenue side, and as of April 21st, our revenue was approximately 620,000, which is a little bit off from where we had expected. Membership and underwriting still being the top 2, and we expect probably an additional 30 to 50,000 in additional revenue. Some of those additional membership and underwriting dollars that will come in May and June. But that gives you a sense of kind of where our revenue stands. So if I were to do the quick math, our operating expenses, again, around 1.6 million. Our revenue at the 0.6, plus we started the year with a cash balance of approximately 110,000. That means the financial gap is more accurately 873,000, or about 123,000 off from where we projected. So why was our projection off? Well, one of the things that we didn't recognize at the time was the history of decline in giving to the radio station. I've given you a snapshot of what membership and underwriting has looked like over the past 7 years. There was a steady decline in membership and underwriting, in large part because of the declining audience at WCB, a station that at one time had 100,000 listeners, and that number has since gone to almost half of that. So you have a decrease over a number of years, and then you quickly see that number spike or drop off sharply in the last 2 years. So that's one factor. The second factor has been what we've talked a lot about this afternoon, and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first part of that is the cost of our personnel. The majority of the staff that work at the station are classified staff, and though we've tried to limit their time inside that building and encourage work from home, we're a 24/7 operation, and so folks do have to come in, and as they come in, their salaries they're paid extra for that time. We also had to scale back our spring fund drive. We can't have guests inside the studio. We can't have phone banks at a time when we are in the pandemic. More importantly, though, as a station, we thought it was important to continue airing news updates and to try to keep some normalcy in programming during a time that was quickly becoming very unnormal and unnerving. But what that meant was that the normal revenue that would come in during the spring from membership was roughly cut by about 75%. The third big impact of this COVID-19 pandemic has been from our underwriters. The majority of our underwriters and advertisers are small local companies, a lot of restaurants who on their own have been impacted by closures and cutbacks, and many of them have simply gone to us to cut back and eliminate their plans for underwriting. Now, with all this bad news, I did want to share one positive. As we look at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the CARES Act, WCBE did receive $75,000 in stimulus funding, which is not accounted for in those revenue dollars. So that's a positive. But at the same time, what's also not accounted for is that each year we typically receive dollars from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But as you know, the station underwent an audit from the Inspector General's office in Washington. And we recently completed that audit, which was presented at a separate board committee. But while that audit process has been going on and until the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting makes a final determination, they have withheld any funding that we would have seen this fiscal year, which is about $125,000 that we typically use to help pay for programming. And so that is missing from our calculations. Now, a short caveat to that is that same audit also determined that the previous station manager misspent about $90,000 of grant dollars, which the Corporation for Public Broadcasting may decide to ask to be repaid. So that $125,000 may be smaller, but again, that's still the determination that they'll make. So that has been the impact to our current financial situation. There are two actions that we've asked the board to take, and some of which will be a part of this committee. The first is at their next meeting, we've asked the board to increase our authorization to pay for National Public Radio. As I mentioned, as part of this past year, the stabilization of the station, it gave us a better sense of what the cost to run the station would be. And to be honest, we still, even in the past month, continue to uncover budget items that were not attributed or accounted for in our initial budget projection. And so that's the case here. We were off by about $14,500 in what we would need to pay National Public Radio this year. Just to note, that additional authorization, that $14,500 would be, we would pay that with our federal dollars, the federal grant dollars from FY19 dollars that we already have and can spend. So that additional authorization that we're asking the board to give us will be taken care of through federal dollars. But the next piece would be the transfer. Though I mentioned before, $750,000 was set aside for our stabilization. We purposely held off on a transfer until we had that more accurate determination of what the amount would be. And so we are currently working with the budget office and the treasurer's office on what that final transfer amount would need to be so that we can close out the books and be balanced as we close out FY20. With all that said, I know that as we look at current finances, it's always important to look at what our planning is, especially given what we saw over the past year. So let me briefly share, as we look ahead to FY21, it's first off important to recognize, and I appreciate the help of the treasurer and the budget office, that they have projected that $750,000 stabilization in the 5-year forecast, not as a commitment, but so that there are no surprises depending upon what action we might decide moving forward with the radio station. One of the ways that we will be looking to reduce the expenses are eliminating some of the paid programming that we have, especially on the weekends or non-drive time hours at the station. Those programs that we have to pay and try to find free programming that we can air on the station. We're also maintaining reduced staffing. 2 key positions, the station manager position and the membership director position, currently are vacant. Now, please know we have an interim station manager, but he's also our traffic director, so he's doing dual duty. As you know, I also shared with this committee before that we have tried to increase the value of the station to the district by being a better partner with our district's communications office. Finding those ways to help promote the district and its message. Great example, if you have an Alexa, the next time you ask her, Alexa, play WCBE, the first thing you will hear is a message that says WCBE is a broadcast service of Columbus City Schools. That's a part of our station ID that's aired every hour by our on-air staff. Another step that we're taking as we look ahead to 2021, our team is ready to renew that membership drive as our economy, as our city begins to reopen, looking for that strategic time in which we might do a summer fund drive prior to our cancellation or scaling back of the spring fund drive. They had some good success with a targeted campaign reaching out to lapsed donors, and they would like to kind of get back into that and look for an opportunity to do some summer fundraising. We'll also look for any other opportunities for additional COVID-19 related support, whether it be here locally or at the federal level, so that we can also try to offset some of our losses. But probably the most important thing we are doing right now is maintaining the value of the station by renewing our FCC license. That is, a valuable piece of paper, that license granted to us so many years ago, and making sure that we continue with that. And so, if we didn't put in that value, we would lose what would be years of investment by the district. But as we look ahead to the year ahead, we also know that there's still more that needs to be done at that station, that the current operating model still doesn't work, that this year-long stabilization effort that we undertook truly revealed the extent of some of the dysfunction at the station. We still find unplanned or unaccounted for expenses. Our membership goals, as you saw, struggle greatly, and we are falling short on underwriting. But probably what is most important and most concerning is that the station's current efforts still fail to fit within the district's educational mission and really the superintendent's priorities that she has set. And if we don't make the changes that we've made so far have really not been enough to meet those high expectations. And we know that continued stabilization without some significant change would really diminish the board's investment. And so as we think about the next steps for the radio station, part of this will be, as we think about the planning, the lessons that we've learned over the past year from really three key areas. We learned lessons of need from our stabilization effort, the work going in there, really looking at the needs of the station in terms of staffing and infrastructure. And an examination of where we stand in the local radio industry. We learned a lot of lessons about risk from the audits that were performed both by our Office of Internal Auditor, but also by the audit that was done by the Inspector General's office, of where we have some gaps in what we do to make sure that we are minimizing risk, making sure that we get those federal dollars and meet all of our contractual obligations. And third, we learned a lot of lessons of opportunity from a group that we pulled together, the WCBE Reimagination Advisory Group, a group of experts from across our city with backgrounds not only in radio and entertainment and the arts, but also in fundraising, legal experts, and most importantly, educational expertise. And it was the purpose of that group to help not determine a specific plan, but really help us develop some guiding principles for the superintendent and the board to consider when they think about the station's future, some guiding principles. Now, I have to tell you that the work of that group, we were starting to come to the end of that process just as the COVID-19 pandemic really started to ramp up. And so the work of that group was put on hold. And so as we look at the action items into this future, one of those items, and you see it there as number 2, but it will be the superintendent. She has asked that I go back to that group, that we finalize that report from that group so that we get those final set of guiding principles. First and foremost, those is getting that license renewed with the FCC. Number 3, will determine that viability of whether we do any more fundraising or what kind of fundraising we do. I shouldn't say anymore. We will do some fundraising and what that looks like for the summer. Continue to implement those cost-saving measures. And then update the timeline for a decision about the future of the station operation. As I mentioned, when we launched the stabilization and reimagination plan a year ago, we had hoped that it would be a time that we'd be able to give a better decision on and an informed decision on what the future of the station should be. but that stabilization effort, us being able to get in and learn as much as possible about the true cost of operating the station, what changes would need to be made, took longer than expected, and was more than we knew, and then also with the pandemic. So as we think about what that future might be, I will say there are probably two big factors. One is that the financial implications of any decision really have taken on some additional weight in light of that, what we discovered in terms of the needs of the station, but also in light of the current crisis and the expected budget tightening across all levels, not just at the district or at the state or at the federal level, but also the budget tightening that's going to go on in the homes of those who we've relied upon to be our donors. So we know that there's budget tightening going on. The other thing I will say is that any decision that we would make would take months to properly implement. And so there is going to be a requirement of some level of stabilization in FY21. And of course, any decision would impact our fundraising and budgeting needs. So with that, I just say that at the radio station, we continue our stabilization efforts and really look to this coming year as an opportunity to put more steps in place. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and take questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Varner, for this presentation and update. I'll open the floor for questions and or comments right now. I'll reserve mine for final. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. And Scott, thank you for this update. I guess I thought a year ago where we were looking was to try to get to a point by now, 1 year out, that we would have the kind of information that the Reimagination Committee was going to provide, that we would have a handle on the financial situation, and that we would now be ready to make a decision about the future of the station. And I'm disappointed in part not to have that. I understand COVID-19 has interfered with everything. And I'm hopeful that we can get that done quickly. And I'm going to reserve judgment on things, pending taking a good look at that report. But my concern is that Jeff Cabot, I think in 19 years ago, was correct that it wasn't necessarily a good fit, and that while we've been aware that the station has not been a good fit with our educational mission, and at least for my part, I don't think that we belong in the radio business. We're an educational institution, and we exist for one reason only, and that is to improve student outcomes. The station does not seem to me to be doing anything about that, and not to be helping that effort. And if it's not a good fit with our mission and priorities, and this past year, we were supposed to take a hard look at that and decide. I'm thinking that we need to unload this property, and I don't know what value the license has. We've talked about it being valuable. I don't really know what that means, but if it has value, then we either sell it or lease it or allow somebody else to operate it on a financial basis that does not cost Columbus City Schools any money. So, I mean, where are we really? When are we going to have that report from the Reimagination folks? Realistically, when will that be in front of us and be able to have the discussion about what to do with WCBE?
Board Member Brown, let me first share that I share in your disappointment. I think when we initially launched the stabilization plan a year ago, we also hoped that it would be by this time that we would have the best sense of direction for the station. I will tell you, and I jokingly say that I bite my tongue each time I say this, but the audits that were performed on the station, both by the internal auditor's office here, but mostly by the Inspector General's office, gave us so much insight into some of the struggles that we had at the station. Everything from recognizing the additional staffing and training that would need to go on to some additional steps that at the time only one person, the former station manager, knew about and wasn't always doing. And that's what put in jeopardy our funding that we get from the federal level. So we really learned a lot about what we were missing at the station in order to comply with those regulations and the contractual obligations that we have with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so I say all that it gives us started to give us a better picture of if we, whatever decisions we make about the station, that we were going to have to make sure that those factors were being thought about. So that was important. To the second part of your question about the value of the station. At the time in 2001, I think the published reports, the newspaper reports estimated that the value of the station was somewhere around $17 million. We know that that's not the case anymore. The radio market has changed significantly. Though I will say that, as a district, we have not, and it may be time to look at perhaps enlisting the help of an appraiser to determine if we should or what the value of the station would be. It's not just the station itself, but the transmitter that we have. And we're fortunate that long ago, the Levesque family allowed for us to put our transmitter on top of the Levesque Tower. And so it gives us some great coverage. And like any appraisal that's done, especially if you were looking at selling your home, that we need an appraiser that will look at, comparable station sales, but also look at the demographics of our market, the market size, but also looking at the pool of buyers. And this is important. Where we are at on the radio spectrum, we're at the beginning of it. That is an area that is reserved for public institutions, nonprofits, for religious programming. It is not for commercial radio. We cannot be, that station cannot be the next Power 107.5 or WNCI. So there's really a limited pool of individuals who could look to purchase that. So all of those factors and how the landscape has changed over the past decade and a half really, I think, scales back our amount. It would be wrong of me to try to guess at an amount, given all of those different factors and how much has changed. But to your point, perhaps it's time for us to get that better sense of what that number might be.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I think we do have to get at that and figure out whether we really do have that kind of value or something valuable, and we have to very soon make a decision on whether we should be in the radio business. And from my perspective, if it's not a match with our goals and strategies and mission as an educational institution, then we should make a change. And if it's a huge struggle that hasn't been successfully done for decades, to have for the station to be a good fit for our students and to help improve their outcomes, then I think we need to start acting on it.
Thank you for that feedback, Board Member Brown. Are there any other questions or comments about this update? Okay. Well, I just have a few myself. Again, thank you so much for the presentation, Mr. Varner. I too am interested, and we've talked at length about this. I too am interested in the understanding the value proposition of the radio station and looking at that fully. Are you prepared at any point in time, Mr. Varner, to give us some idea about when you will actually have something in front of us that either gives us a reimagination of this radio station, the way it's earlier described, something that aligns with our mission and vision, something that provides curriculum pathway, something that gives us some sense of its optimal use, that is advantageous to the district and most importantly our students, something that is self-sustainable, right? Possibly even revenue generating. Or are you able to present, and within a given timeline, something that will give us a very clear idea of the value of the station, and we should know that regardless, but most importantly, some other audit type stuff, like where are we depreciating in value? At this point, as I see it, we're going to be close to $1 million investment just this year alone, and what you're asking us for. This puts us, I want to say, between last year and this year at about 1.6 million. Is that correct? Is my math on? Okay. All right. So we go ahead and make this appropriation. We're looking at a $1.6 million investment just over the last 2 years alone, with no clarity about what its value proposition is and how much we're losing or gaining, and no optimal idea of what its productive use could be to us and our students. I think we deserve or need an idea of some sort of timeline on when you'll actually have that kind of work done and able to be presented to the board. I do know you have some options that were kind of developed with as a part of this presentation, but can you give us an idea of some sort of timeline? Is there an alignment to the superintendent's current vision for one-to-one learning, portrait of a graduate, that type of deal?
There are a lot of factors in there. Thank you for that question. We'll be working, and I'll be working with the district leadership to try to determine a best time in which a better time frame, an updated time frame, so that we do know when it will be best to come before the board, before the community, to give a better sense of what those changes might look like at the station on a larger scale. As I shared earlier, we've made minor changes at the station, and continue to look for those minor changes that we can make to reduce costs or to increase benefits for the district, to try to make sure that we are getting the revenue that we can, and not doing anything to jeopardize revenue that would come in, either grant dollars or membership dollars, but recognizing that's really not enough. And so, again, as I mentioned, I'll be working with the executive leadership team to best determine what the new timeline looks like.
And my closing question, if there aren't any more, and I thank you all so much for hanging on with us on this one particularly, what are we looking at in terms of assist that you may need, particularly around helping you develop some sort of operational / business plan for on the optimal projection side of what this could look like for us, right? Where are you getting the assistance? Are you looking currently for assistance, whether it's a consultant? Where are you looking to add value to your knowledge capital to give you some additional insights on compliance measures, I know that there's a lot that we still don't know that you're uncovering, as you said earlier. And there's a need for some folks who have that expertise to help us on the compliance end maintain operations up until such time that we make a decision or to keep it or sell it.
Board Member Cole, can I chime in for a little
Yes,
bit
ma'am.
of response?
Thank you.
Thank you. First, I'd like to echo thank you, Scott, for your work, and thank you to the Reimagination Advisory Group. I know it was tough work, and it was very thoughtful work that the team put in to provide this presentation for us today. But as it was stated, I know that we did want to get a sense of where we are in this presentation, but we know that there's more work that needs to be done, and we need more experts to kind of help assist in what that larger vision looks like. And so, Board Member Cole, we're committed to providing some additional expertise to look at this. As we look at the future of work and where our students can be impactful of something like a station, perhaps there is a connection with our CTE programs. Perhaps there's some other connections or partnerships with the station. We just didn't have the experts that knows about those areas as part of the advisory team. So what I would like for us to do is to have some more time to have some additional experts to work with Scott and our executive team to come back and bring you a more detailed recommendations with costs and with some added vision to it, to say if we're going to invest, what that cost is going to be and how we're going to utilize it in our organization, or if we want to partner with another organization and utilize the station this way. Or a third option is we may be time for us to think very differently. That would be my ask, and I hope I articulate that for you, Scott. I didn't mean to chime in, but I just think that that's where we need to go. And I, from the team, we just didn't have the experts to move in that direction. However, the team did a great job exploring what the possibilities could be. Now we need to make one next steps and bring back a fully vetted recommendation. And we would like to have another year to bring that back to this committee next spring.
I thank you very kindly. If you feel as though you're not clear enough on the value sets, if you will, of board members, please feel free in this interim, as soon as possible, in fact, to glean from us what exactly you need. So you've heard words and terms like sustainability. You've heard things like alignments to curriculum and to our mission and vision. All your brilliant minds, so all of that's low-hanging fruit. But if there's something additional that you feel like you're going to need for clarity from the board and what we're looking for, I really encourage you to seek that information as soon as you possibly can. Is there anything else? And you're saying timeline, you're thinking is by next when, you said?
I just think now, in order to, and because I've asked his team, the Reimagine Advisory Group needs to finish up their work. And then I think once he meets with those team members and finish up their work, then there's another piece, and it goes out to some consultants perhaps that can vet those final recommendations. And when those final recommendations are completed, then they'll be able to bring to the board a financial outlook, all of those pieces that you would need to make, that we would need to make a more in-depth recommendation. Yes, we know we have some thoughts about the direction we could go in, but unless we have that information in written form, I think we're still just, utilizing, our maybe guesses, feelings, our observations, what we've not seen, and just give us just a little more time to vet it and bring back that proper data. Because I know this board loves data and they want to make some data-driven decisions. And I want to be able to put that data in front of you. So when we make that decision, we're done. We know how much we have to invest if we decide we want to keep it. We know how much, if we sell it, how much revenue we can possibly gain from it. Or if we know we want to partner with another organization, we know what that partnership ask would be in order for it to be a viable partnership.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So for the sake of this conversation, Mr. Treasurer, is it, and Mr. Gooding, if you're still on, is it that you need a recommendation from this committee to move forward on this fiscal year's appropriation to WCBE? I know we have built in the 5-year forecast, the $750,000, but for the sake of this, this fiscal year, are you needing a voted recommendation from us, or how do we proceed?
I think for us, oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, I was going to apologize. I was having some technical issues, so I had to switch over to my phone here. We're not looking for any approval right now. We really wanted to just give the committee an update, but we'll come back with any true numbers in June, because we'll take whatever the transfer is amount that we'll need to do to the board in June. So we'll bring it back to FAC next week, and we can put that on for approval at that time, if that's okay.
Mr. Treasurer?
That's what I was going to say. So
okay.
we're of like mind.
Michael.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
If we're going to take another year, and I guess in my mind that's a fairly long period of time, I wonder if it would make sense to also study and at least rough out what disengaging from the station might look like, what it might cost, to market it, to unwind, whatever it takes, so that we can have that option in front of us a year from now, at least in some fashion, while we do all the rest.
I thank you for that and totally agree. With that, does that conclude your report, Mr. Varner, your update?
That does. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, Dr. Dixon. I really appreciate the opportunity to give this update, but also to keep you informed on kind of our visioning process as we think about this asset in the district.
All right. I thank you so much for that. With that, are there any questions or closing comments? Awesome. If all minds are clear, Mr. Treasurer, is there a motion for adjournment?
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Okay, Mr. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson? Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
And Chair Cole?
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you all for being in on this meeting with us. Thank you so much. Stay in good health, each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.